My name is Michael Thompson, though most folks around Billings, Montana, just call me Mike. For 38 years, I've lived by a simple creed. A man's worth is measured by what he builds with his own two hands, and Lord knows, I built plenty. The house sat on 40 acres of rolling prairie, just far enough from town to feel like our own kingdom. I remember the day I broke ground. Sarah was 6 months pregnant with Emma, and I promised her I'd have the frame up before the baby came. Took me 3 months of working dawn to dusk, but I kept that promise. Every 2x4, every nail, every shingle that crowned that roof came from my labor. When neighbors drove by, they'd slow down and point. "Oh, that's Mike Thompson's place," they'd say, and I'd feel my chest swell with satisfaction. The construction business had been good to us. Thompson and Sons Construction, though the Sons part was still a dream deferred, with Emma now 16 and Jake 14. But I figured the name had a nice ring to it, suggested permanence, legacy. I'd built half the custom homes in Yellowstone County, earned a reputation for quality work that stood the test of Montana winters and scorching summers alike. If you believe that miracles still happen, or if you've ever experienced something that deeply touched your faith, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking this journey of faith together. Sarah would tease me about my pride, but she understood. When you grow up in a single-wide trailer with a father who drank more than he worked, you learn early that security doesn't come from hoping, it comes from doing. Every square foot of our 200-square-foot home represented a victory over the uncertainty of my childhood. The hardwood floors I'd milled myself from Montana oak, the stone fireplace built with rocks I'd hauled from the crazy mountains, the wraparound porch where Sarah would sit with her morning coffee watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold. All of it was proof that Mike Thompson was no failure. The workshop behind the house was my cathedral. 30 by 40 feet of organized chaos, filled with tools that sang in my hands, the smell of sawdust and machine oil. The satisfying bite of a sharp chisel through pine, the perfect curve of a hand-sanded banister, these were my prayers, my meditation. On Saturday mornings, Jake would join me there, his gangly teenage frame bent over a project, trying to match my precision. Emma preferred helping her mother in the garden, but sometimes I'd catch her watching from the kitchen window as I worked, a small smile playing at her lips. "Do you know what I love most about this place?" Sarah had asked me just last month, standing in our bedroom doorway as I replaced a squeaky hinge. She was wearing that old flannel nightgown, her auburn hair catching the lamplight, still beautiful after 19 years of marriage. "What's that?" I'd answered, focused on aligning the screws perfectly. "It's not just a house, Mike. It's your signature on the world. Every room tells the story of who we are." She was right. The hand-carved newel post at the bottom of the stairs bore the initials of our whole family, carved the day we'd moved in. The kitchen cabinets held the slight imperfections that proved they were made by human hands, not machines. The master bathroom still showed the tile work where Emma had helped at age 7, leaving tiny handprints in the grout that I'd never had the heart to fix. Our life had rhythm, predictability. Monday through Friday, I'd be on job sites, coming home dusty and tired but satisfied. Evenings meant family dinners around the table I'd built from reclaimed barnwood, homework sessions where I'd help Jake with his math, conversations with Emma about her college plans. Weekends were for maintenance, improvement projects, family time, church on Sundays at First Presbyterian, where I served on the board of trustees and had personally overseen the renovation of the sanctuary. I was respected in town, known as a man of his word. My handshake was as good as any contract, my work guaranteed for life. The bank knew my signature, my credit was pristine, my reputation solid as the foundations I poured. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do. I was a provider, a pillar of the community, a man who'd built something lasting. But pride, I've learned, is kindling waiting for a spark. The evening of September 15th started like any other. I'd come home from a job site where we were framing a new house for the Hendersons, my clothes carrying the honest scent of fresh lumber and autumn air. Sarah had made pot roast, my favorite, and the kitchen was warm with the smell of meat and vegetables slow cooking all day. Emma was at the kitchen table working on college applications, her dark hair falling across her face as she concentrated. Jake was in his room, supposedly doing homework, but probably playing video games. "How'd the Henderson job go today?" Sarah asked, setting a plate in front of me. The meat was perfectly tender, falling apart at the touch of my fork. "Ahead of schedule," I said with satisfaction. "Should have the roof on by Friday if the weather holds." "That's my husband," she smiled, kissing the top of my head. "And always ahead of schedule." After dinner, I'd gone to the workshop to sand a jewelry box I was making for Emma's 18th birthday next month. The piece was nearly finished. Cherry wood with dovetail joints and a hand-fitted lid that closed with a whisper. I'd been working on it for months, carving her initials into the top with small flourishes that matched her personality. It was going to be perfect. I stayed out there until nearly 11, lost in the meditative rhythm of sandpaper against wood grain. The radio played softly in the background, classic country, the soundtrack of my contentment. When I finally turned off the lights and locked up, I stood for a moment in the yard, looking up at our house. Every window glowed with warm yellow light, and I could see Sarah moving around in our bedroom, getting ready for bed. This was my kingdom. This was everything I'd worked for, everything that defined me. I had no idea that in 4 hours, it would all be gone. The smell woke me first. Even in sleep, some primitive part of my brain recognized the acrid bite of smoke and jolted me awake with the urgency of survival. For a confused moment, I thought someone was burning brush nearby, but the smell was too close, too strong. Then I heard the sound that would haunt my dreams for months afterward, the hungry crackle of flames eating wood. "Sarah!" I shook her awake, my heart already hammering against my ribs. "Sarah, get up! Something's burning!" She sat up instantly, that mother's instinct that never truly sleeps. "The kids," she whispered, and we both moved at once. I threw on pants and ran to the hallway, Sarah close behind in her nightgown. The smell was stronger here, and I could see a faint orange glow coming from downstairs. But first, "Emma!" I pounded on her door. "Jake, get up!" "Now!" Emma's door opened immediately. She'd been awake too, probably smelling the smoke. Her face was pale in the hallway light, but she was alert, focused. "Dad, what's fire?" I said simply. "Get dressed, fast." Jake's room was next. I burst through his door without knocking, found him sitting up in bed, confusion written across his face. "Jake, fire. Get up. Move." The next few minutes blurred together in a chaos of adrenaline and terror. Sarah was grabbing important papers from our bedroom safe while I herded the kids downstairs. The smoke was thicker now, making our eyes water, and the orange glow was brighter, much brighter. We reached the living room, and my world tilted on its axis. The entire back wall was engulfed in flames. They rose from floor to ceiling in sheets of orange and red, consuming the built-in bookshelves I'd crafted by hand, devouring the family photos that chronicled our life together. The heat was intense, a living thing that pushed against us with malevolent force. The sound was worse than I'd imagined, not just crackling, but roaring, as if some massive beast had awakened in my home and was feeding on everything I'd built. "The workshop," I breathed, understanding flooding through me with sick clarity. I'd been so careful, so meticulous about safety, but something, an electrical short, an overturned space heater, a cigarette butt from a passing car had found its way into my sanctuary and turned it into an inferno that was now consuming my home. "Mike, we have to go." Sarah grabbed my arm, trying to pull me toward the front door. But I couldn't move. I stood, transfixed, watching flames climb the hand-hewn support beam that had been the centerpiece of our great room. The beam I'd selected personally from a centuries-old barn. The beam that had cost me 3 weeks of evenings to properly install. "Dad," Emma's voice cut through my paralysis. She was standing by the front door, holding our emergency bag, her face streaked with tears and smoke. Jake stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking to me to tell them what to do next. I was their father, their protector, the man who built strong things that kept families safe, and I was failing them. "Go," I managed. "Everyone outside, now." We stumbled out into the September night, the cool air shocking against our smoke-heated skin. I herded my family to the far side of the yard, to the old oak tree where we'd hung a tire swing when the kids were small. From there, we turned to watch our life burn. The fire had already consumed the entire back section of the house and was working its way forward with terrifying speed. Windows exploded outward in showers of glass and sparks. The roof over the kitchen collapsed inward with a sound like thunder, sending a column of sparks spiraling up into the star-filled sky. Sarah was on her phone with 911, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "It's too far," Jake said quietly, and I realized he was right. We lived 40 minutes from the nearest fire station, and by the time they arrived, there would be nothing left to save. We could only stand and watch as everything I'd built was devoured by flames that seemed to mock my every achievement. I watched the living room windows blow out. I watched the front porch collapse. The porch where Sarah had spent countless mornings with her coffee. I watched flames burst through the roof of Emma's bedroom, the room where I'd painted princess castles on the walls when she was 5. The cherry jewelry box I'd been finishing for her birthday was in the workshop. Along with every tool I owned, every piece of equipment that represented my livelihood. "The photo albums," Sarah whispered. "The baby books, 20 years of Christmas mornings. My computer," Emma said, "all my college essays, my art portfolio. My baseball card collection," Jake added, his voice small. "Dad's first edition Mickey Mantle." Each loss hit me like a physical blow, not just the objects themselves, but what they represented. The Mickey Mantle card had been a gift from my grandfather, the only thing of value he'd left me. Emma's art portfolio represented 4 years of high school work she'd planned to submit to art schools. Sarah's photo albums were the visual history of our family, irreplaceable memories reduced to ash. The volunteer fire department arrived at 3:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I kept staring at my watch, as if tracking the minutes could somehow slow the destruction. They did their best, but by then the house was a total loss. They focused on containing the blaze, keeping it from spreading to the barn and the neighboring property. Professional and efficient, they worked through the night. But I could see in their faces what I already knew. This was a recovery operation, not a rescue. By dawn, it was over. I stood in what had been our front yard, looking at the skeletal remains of my life's work. The stone fireplace still stood, blackened and cracked, rising from the rubble like a tombstone. Twisted metal that had once been appliances lay scattered among the debris. The foundation walls were intact but scarred, and everything else, every board I'd cut, every nail I'd driven, every surface I'd sanded smooth was gone. The smell clung to everything, our clothes, our hair, our skin. Acrid and bitter, it was the scent of complete destruction, and I knew it would follow us for weeks. My hands shook as I walked through the ruins, stirring ash with my feet. Here was the spot where our kitchen table had stood. There was the corner where Emma had taken her first steps. Under that pile of charred timber lay the hardwood floors I'd installed by hand. Sarah came up beside me and took my hand. Her palm was cool against my fevered skin, and I realized I was shaking. Not just my hands, my whole body was trembling like I was freezing. Though the September morning was warm. "Mike," she said softly, "look at me." I turned to meet her eyes, those green eyes that had looked at me with love for 19 years. But now I saw something else there. Fear. Not fear of the fire, or fear of what we'd lost. Fear of me, fear of what this might do to the man she'd married, the man who'd built his entire identity around being strong, capable, successful. "We're alive," she said. "That's what matters. We're all alive and safe." I nodded because that's what you do. You agree that life is more important than possessions. You say the right things about how things can be replaced, but people can't. You focus on gratitude instead of grief. But inside, something was crumbling that had nothing to do with wood and stone. Inside, I was falling into an abyss that felt deeper and darker than any fire could burn. The Red Cross put us up in a hotel room on the outskirts of Billings. 2 double beds, a small table, and a view of the parking lot. Everything we owned fit into the complimentary toiletry bags they'd given us, plus the clothes on our backs and the emergency bag Sarah had grabbed on our way out. 48 hours ago, I'd owned a successful business, a beautiful home, and a shop full of tools worth more than most people's cars. Now I was staring at a continental breakfast, wondering how we'd pay for next week's room. Sarah handled the insurance calls with her usual efficiency, but I could hear the strain in her voice. The adjuster would be out tomorrow. We'd need to provide receipts, documentation, proof of value for everything we'd lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built a life of tangible things, solid and real, and now I needed paperwork to prove it had ever existed. Emma and Jake were adapting with the resilience of teenagers. They'd gone to school wearing borrowed clothes, carrying borrowed supplies. Friends and neighbors had already started dropping off donations, boxes of clothing that didn't quite fit, toiletries, gift cards for necessities. The kindness was overwhelming and humbling, and somehow made everything worse. I couldn't go to work, not because I was physically unable, but because I couldn't function. Every time I picked up my phone to call the Henderson job site, my hands would shake. The thought of pretending everything was normal, of swinging a hammer and measuring lumber while my whole world lay in ashes, felt impossible. Mike. Sarah found me sitting on one of the hotel beds at 2 in the afternoon, still in the same clothes I'd worn to breakfast. "The kids will be home from school soon. Maybe we should go look at rental houses." I nodded without looking at her. "Sure, yeah, that's smart." But I didn't move. Couldn't move. The weight of our situation was pressing down on my chest like a physical thing. No house, no workshop, no tools. The insurance would pay eventually, but how much? Enough to rebuild, enough to replace 20 years of accumulated life. And what about my business? I had 3 jobs in progress. Contracts that required me to provide materials and labor with tools I no longer possessed. "The Hendersons called," Sarah said carefully, sitting on the bed beside me. "They're concerned about the progress on their house." Of course they were. I had a reputation to maintain, deadlines to meet. But how do you explain to a client that you can't frame their walls because your nail guns melted in a fire? How do you tell them that you can't measure their lumber because your tape measures a twisted metal in a pile of debris? "I'll call them back," I said. "When?" "Later." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mike, talk to me. What's going on in your head?" Everything. Nothing. The complete absence of everything I'd used to define myself. But how do you explain that to your wife? How do you tell the woman who's counting on you to be strong that you feel like you're disappearing? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. Not then. That night, while Sarah and the kids slept in the cramped hotel room, I stood at the window looking out at the parking lot, 18-wheelers idled by the highway, their diesel engines rumbling in the darkness. Beyond them, the lights of Billings spread out like fallen stars. And beyond that, our empty lot waited in the darkness. I kept thinking about the jewelry box. Of all the things I'd lost, that small piece of cherry wood haunted me most. It had been nearly finished, perfect in every detail, crafted with love for my daughter's 18th birthday. Now it was ash, along with every other expression of my skill, my artistry, my identity as a man who built beautiful things. Who was Mike Thompson without his tools, without his workshop, without the tangible proof of his competence and success? I'd never asked myself that question because I'd never imagined needing to know the answer. The next morning brought the insurance adjuster, a thin man named Peterson, who walked through our ruins with practiced efficiency. He took photos, made notes, asked questions I couldn't answer. How much had I paid for the band saw? What year had I bought the truck that was now a skeleton of melted metal in the driveway? What was the square footage of the workshop? This is preliminary, he said, handing Sarah a stack of forms. We'll need complete documentation, receipts, bank records, anything that proves ownership and value. The personal property claim alone will take weeks to process. Weeks. Meanwhile, I had payroll to meet, jobs to complete, a reputation to maintain. Thompson and Sons Construction had contracts worth over $200,000. But Mike Thompson was sitting in a hotel room with nothing but the clothes on his back. I tried to rally. That afternoon, I drove to the Henderson job site in Sarah's car, planning to assess what could be salvaged, what needed to be explained, how to move forward. But when I arrived and saw the half-framed house, the neat stacks of lumber, the work that required tools I no longer possessed, I sat in the parking lot and couldn't get out of the car. My phone buzzed with calls from subcontractors, suppliers, clients. Each ring felt like an accusation. Mike Thompson, the man who always delivered, who never made excuses, who built his reputation on reliability. That man had died in the fire along with everything else. I drove home to the hotel without getting out of the car. "How did it go?" Sarah asked when I walked in. "Fine," I said. "Everything's under control." Another lie. They were coming easier now. That evening, while Sarah took the kids to buy school supplies, I found myself driving out to our property. The fire department had cleared the debris from the driveway, and crime scene tape marked the foundation. I parked by the old oak tree and walked toward the ruins. The smell hit me first, that acrid, bitter scent of destruction that seemed to have permanently stained the air. In daylight, the devastation looked even worse. Charred timber lay scattered like broken bones. The stone fireplace rose from the rubble, its once perfect mortar lines now cracked and blackened. Pieces of our life lay scattered everywhere, a melted picture frame, the twisted metal of Emma's bed frame, fragments of dishes that Sarah had collected over years of marriage. I picked up a piece of charred wood that might have once been part of the kitchen cabinets I'd built by hand. It crumbled between my fingers, leaving black stains on my palms. Everything I'd created, everything that had proven my worth as a man, had been reduced to fragments and ash. Standing there in the ruins of my life's work, I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. That was still beating, still pumping blood through my body. Something deeper. The part of me that had believed in my own strength, my own ability to protect and provide for my family. That part crumbled like the charred wood in my hands. I sank to my knees in the ash and finally let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just possessions, not just a house and workshop, but my identity, my purpose, the solid foundation of who I thought I was. And for the first time since the night of the fire, I cried. 3 weeks after the fire, I was drunk at 10 in the morning. Not falling down drunk, but that steady, careful intoxication that dulls the sharp edges of reality without completely numbing the pain. I'd started with beer at breakfast, told Sarah I was going to meet with the insurance adjuster, and instead drove to Mickey's Tavern on the rough side of Billings, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and the bartender doesn't comment when you order whiskey with your coffee. The Henderson job had fired me 2 days earlier. "We understand your situation." "Mike," Bill Henderson had said over the phone, his voice carefully sympathetic. But we've got deadlines, and frankly, we can't afford delays. We're going with Morrison Construction. Morrison Construction. My biggest competitor, a company I'd been outselling for 5 years. They'd swooped in like vultures, promising to complete the work I'd started, using my blueprints, my planning, my vision. The irony tasted more bitter than the whiskey. 2 more clients had followed Henderson's lead, the Petersons and the Walsh family, both citing the same concerns about delays and reliability. My reputation, the thing I'd spent 20 years building, the foundation of my business, was crumbling as surely as my house had burned. You gonna nurse that drink all day, or actually drink it? The bartender's name was Frank, and he'd been pouring drinks for morning drinkers long enough to recognize the difference between someone drowning their sorrows and someone just looking for an excuse to disappear. Maybe both, I said, and ordered another. Sarah didn't know. At least, she hadn't said anything. Each morning I left the hotel with a thermos of coffee and promises to rebuild, to start over, to contact insurance companies and suppliers and architects. Instead, I drove around Billings looking at the construction sites where other men were doing the work I should have been doing, using the tools I no longer owned, building the dreams I no longer felt capable of achieving. The worst part wasn't the drinking, though that was bad enough. The worst part was the lying. 20 years of marriage built on honesty and trust, and now I was weaving elaborate fictions about meetings with adjusters, phone calls with potential clients. Progress on insurance claims. Sarah would ask how my day had gone, and I'd spin tales of bureaucratic delays and promising leads, all while tasting whiskey on my breath and hoping she wouldn't notice. Dad? Emma found me at the hotel room table one afternoon, staring at a pile of insurance paperwork I hadn't touched. She was home early from school, still wearing the borrowed clothes that hung slightly wrong on her teenage frame. Hey, sweetheart. How was school? Fine. She sat across from me, studying my face with that unsettling intensity teenagers possessed. Are you okay? The question landed like a punch to the stomach. Of course I wasn't okay. My daughter was wearing someone else's clothes, sleeping in a hotel room, worrying about whether her father could provide for her family. Her college applications were ash. Her portfolio was ash. Her entire senior year disrupted because I'd failed to protect the life I'd built for her. I'm fine, I said automatically. Just dealing with insurance stuff. You know how it is. Mom's worried about you. Of course she was. Sarah had been throwing me concerned glances for days, starting conversations about counseling and grief support groups, suggesting I talk to Pastor Williams at church. All reasonable suggestions from a wife who was watching her husband disappear into a bottle and lies. There's nothing to worry about, I told Emma. Everything's going to be okay. Another lie. They were coming so naturally now that I barely noticed them anymore. That night, I lay in one of the hotel beds listening to my family sleep and staring at the water stain on the ceiling. Sarah's breathing was soft and even beside me, but I could tell by the tension in her body that she wasn't really asleep. Emma and Jake occupied the other bed, their teenage limbs tangled in a way that reminded me of when they were small enough to share a crib. My phone sat on the nightstand, dark and silent. No calls from clients, no messages from subcontractors. Word had spread through the tight construction community of Yellowstone County. Mike Thompson was done. Finished. A man who'd let a fire destroy not just his possessions, but his ability to function as a professional. I thought about the workshop again, as I did every night. Not just the tools I'd lost, but the dreams those tools had built. The custom cabinets that had taken weeks to perfect, the built-ins that had transformed ordinary rooms into showcases, the small repairs I'd done for elderly neighbors who couldn't afford to pay but appreciated the work anyway. Every project had been a signature, a statement that Mike Thompson built things to last. Now I built nothing. I was nothing. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and walked outside to the hotel parking lot. September in Montana was crisp and clear, the kind of night that used to fill me with energy and possibility. Now it just felt cold. I sat on the concrete steps leading to our room and tried to remember what it felt like to be competent, successful, proud of my work. And I can't sleep either. I turned to find Jake beside me, wearing a borrowed jacket over borrowed pajamas, my 14-year-old son, who should have been dreaming about baseball and video games, sitting on hotel steps at midnight because his father had failed to provide him with a real home. "What are you doing up, buddy?" Thinking about stuff. He sat down beside me, our shoulders touching, about the house, about starting over, starting over. The phrase everyone had been using, as if it was simple, natural, expected, as if losing everything you'd worked for was just another life transition, like changing jobs or moving to a new town. "What do you think about starting over?" I asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I think it's scary, but also kind of exciting. Like, we get to decide who we are now, you know, without all the old stuff defining us." Wisdom from a 14-year-old. My son could see possibility where I could only see loss, hope where I could only see failure. But that's what young people do. They adapt, they rebuild, they move forward because they haven't yet learned that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. "What if I don't know how to start over?" I asked, not really meaning to voice the question aloud. Jake looked at me with those serious eyes that reminded me so much of Sarah. "Then maybe you don't start over. Maybe you just start. Just start." Such simple words from my son, sitting on hotel steps in the middle of the night. But they hit me with the force of revelation, cutting through weeks of self-pity and whiskey and lies to reveal a truth I'd been avoiding. I had a choice. I could continue disappearing into grief and alcohol and deception, or I could choose to begin again, right here, right now, with nothing but the love of my family and whatever strength I could find in myself. But first, I had to hit bottom completely, and that was still 2 days away. The bottom came on a Tuesday night that started with the best of intentions. I'd spent the day sober, focused, making real phone calls to real people about real possibilities. The insurance settlement was finally moving forward, not enough to rebuild everything we'd lost, but enough to start over. I'd even driven out to look at a small rental house on the west side of town, something temporary where we could live, while I figured out how to resurrect Thompson and Sons construction. Sarah had been cautiously optimistic at dinner, talking about the kids, adjustment to their new schools, about the kindness of our church community, about the possibility of this being a new chapter rather than an ending. For the first time in weeks, I felt something resembling hope stirring in my chest. Then Pastor Williams called. "Mike, I've got some difficult news." His voice carried the careful tone religious leaders used when delivering life's harder truths. "I got a call from Bill Henderson today. He wanted to know if the church was planning to help with your rebuilding fund." The rebuilding fund? Our congregation had been raising money to help us get back on our feet, not charity, they'd insisted, but Christian love in action. People who didn't have much themselves contributing $5 and $10 bills, because that's what community meant. He seemed to think, Pastor Williams continued carefully, that maybe the money would be better spent elsewhere. He mentioned some concerns about your reliability. Reliability? The word hit me like a physical blow. Bill Henderson, whose house I'd framed perfectly despite having no tools, questioning my reliability to my pastor, poisoning the well of community support with whispers about Mike Thompson's inability to handle his business, his responsibilities, his life. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that how we choose to help our members is our business, not his. But Mike, I'm concerned about some of the things he said. He mentioned seeing you at Mickey's Tavern during work hours." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes. Pastor Williams speaking with genuine concern about grief counseling and support groups and the importance of facing our trials with faith instead of alcohol. All wise words, all true words, all words that bounced off me like rain off stone because all I could hear was the echo of Bill Henderson's judgment. Mike Thompson, unreliable. Mike Thompson, the drunk who couldn't handle losing his toys. Mike Thompson, the fallen man whose own community was questioning whether he deserved their help. After I hung up, I sat in the hotel parking lot for an hour, engine running, heater blasting against the October cold. Sarah was inside helping Emma with college applications, helping Jake with homework, holding our family together while I fell apart. They deserved better than a husband and father who couldn't function without his security blankets of wood and stone and steel. I drove to Mickey's Tavern and ordered a double whiskey, then another. Then I stopped counting. Frank, the bartender, tried to cut me off around 9 o'clock, but I convinced him I was fine to drive, that I just needed one more to take the edge off. Another lie in a growing catalogue of deceptions. The truth was, I didn't want the edge taken off. I wanted the edge sharpened until it cut deep enough to end the pain permanently. The drive back to our property wasn't conscious. Somehow, my muscle memory navigated the dark roads while my mind swam in alcohol and self-recrimination. I found myself parked by the oak tree again, staring at the ruins of my life by moonlight. The foundation walls looked like broken teeth in the darkness. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, a yellow reminder that this place was off limits, condemned, dangerous, perfect, I thought. A dangerous place for a dangerous man who destroyed everything he touched. I climbed out of the car and stumbled through the debris field that had once been my workshop. Here was where my table saw had stood. There was the corner where I'd kept my collection of vintage hand planes. Under that pile of charred timber lay the anniversary gift I'd been making for Sarah, a jewelry armoire with secret compartments and hand-cut dovetails, all ash, all gone, all proof that Mike Thompson had been a failure even before the fire revealed his true nature. I found myself in what had been the center of our living room, standing where our family had spent thousands of hours together. Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, quiet evenings watching television while I worked on small projects and Sarah read beside me. The ghosts of our happiness seemed to mock me from the shadows. This was where I should die, I realized with perfect drunken clarity, among the ashes of everything I'd built and lost. Sarah and the kids would be better off without me. They could collect the life insurance, start fresh without the anchor of my failure dragging them down. They were young, resilient, capable of building new lives without the broken shell of the man I'd become. I pulled out my phone and started typing a text message to Sarah. I'm sorry, you deserve better. Take care of the kids. I love you all. My finger hovered over the send button, and that's when I heard the voice. Not audible exactly, not the kind of voice that would register on a recording device or that anyone else could have heard, but unmistakably real, cutting through the alcohol fog and self-pity with the clarity of truth. Michael. I looked up, expecting to see headlights, maybe a police officer or security guard checking on the property. Instead, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the ruins, just beyond the yellow tape. A man in simple clothes, his face calm in the moonlight, his presence filling the empty space with something I hadn't felt in weeks, peace. I knew who it was immediately. Not with my mind. My alcohol-soaked brain was still trying to process the impossibility of what I was seeing, but my spirit recognized him instantly, the way a lost child recognizes the voice of home, Jesus. He didn't speak with words, but somehow I heard him anyway. Heard him in the deepest part of my soul, where no lie could take root. You think you have nothing left? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered among the debris. Look around you, Michael. What do you see? I saw ruins, Ash, the destroyed remnants of everything I'd built and lost. Look deeper. And somehow, I did. Through the tears and alcohol and despair, I saw something else. The foundation was still there, blackened but solid. The oak tree still stood, its branches reaching towards stars that had witnessed the destruction but hadn't fallen. The land itself was unchanged, the 40 acres of Montana prairie that had supported my dreams and could support new ones. But more than that, I saw the love that had been lived here, and that love hadn't burned. It lived in Sarah's determination to hold our family together. It lived in Emma's resilience, adapting to borrowed clothes and new schools without complaint. It lived in Jake's wisdom, seeing possibility where others saw only loss. Your house burned, the voice continued, gentle as wind through wheat. Your tools burned, your workshop burned, but you didn't burn, Michael. You're still here. Your family is still here. Your love for them, their love for you, that didn't burn. But I'm nothing without all that, I whispered. And I don't know who I am if I'm not a builder, a provider, a successful man. You're my son. You're Sarah's husband. You're Emma and Jake's father. You're a man loved by his community, treasured by his family, valued not for what you build, but for who you are. The words wrapped around me like warmth, melting the ice that had formed around my heart over the past month. I sank to my knees in the ash, my body shaking with sobs that had been building for weeks. I don't know how to start over. You don't start over. You start from here, from this moment, with what you have instead of what you've lost. The figure began to fade, but his presence remained, filling the empty spaces inside me with something I'd thought was gone forever. Hope. Not hope for returning to who I'd been, but hope for becoming who I was meant to be. I don't know how long I knelt there in the ruins, crying and praying and feeling pieces of my broken spirit slowly reassemble. When I finally stood, my legs shaking and my clothes covered with ash, the figure was gone. But the peace remained, and the certainty that I wasn't alone, had never been alone, even in my darkest moments. I picked up my phone and deleted the unsent message. Then I typed a new one. Coming home, I love you. Sarah was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived at the hotel. Her face tight with worry and relief. She took one look at me, ash-covered, tear-streaked, but somehow more present than I'd been in weeks, and wrapped her arms around me. I know, she whispered against my chest. I know. That night, I told her everything. About the drinking, the lying, the clients I'd lost, the despair that had nearly consumed me, about the voice in the ruins and the peace that had replaced my panic, about the realization that I'd been grieving not just what I'd lost, but who I thought I was, and the discovery that maybe that man had needed to die so something better could be born. Sarah listened without judgment, holding my hand while I confessed my failures and fears. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So what now? She asked. Now we start from here, I said, finally understanding what that meant. With what we have instead of what we've lost. Spring came early to Montana that year, arriving in March with the kind of warm winds that make winter seem like a distant memory. I was standing in what had once been our front yard, now cleared of debris and ready for new construction, watching the sunrise paint the crazy mountains gold. In my hands, I held the blueprints for our new house, smaller than what we'd lost, simpler, but designed with lessons learned from ashes and grace. 6 months had passed since the night I met Jesus in the ruins. 6 months of rebuilding not just a business and a home, but a marriage, a family, and most importantly, myself. The work had been harder than any construction project I'd ever tackled, requiring tools I'd never learned to use, humility, vulnerability, faith without visible proof. Thompson & Sons Construction was rising from its own ashes, though it looked different now. Instead of chasing the biggest contracts and the most prestigious custom homes, I'd focused on smaller projects that mattered. Repairing elderly Mrs. Patterson's front steps for free, building wheelchair ramps for veterans, teaching carpentry skills to teenagers at the community center. The work paid less, but meant more, and somehow the money always seemed to be enough. "Dad, the concrete truck's here," Jake called from the road. He'd grown 3 inches over the winter and could now swing a hammer with real authority. Emma was taking a gap year between high school and college, working as my office manager and proving she'd inherited her mother's head for numbers along with my eye for design. The foundation pour was a family affair. Sarah had taken the day off from her new job at the insurance agency, ironic given our circumstances. But she'd discovered a talent for helping people navigate their own disasters. Emma managed the paperwork and coordinated deliveries. Jake worked alongside me, mixing mortar and checking levels with the precision of someone who'd learned that good work was its own reward. But we weren't alone. Half the congregation from First Presbyterian had shown up to help, along with neighbors, friends, and even a few former clients who'd heard we were rebuilding. Bill Henderson was noticeably absent, but his replacement as church trustee, Tom Morrison, my former competitor, was there with a crew of his own workers. "Heard you might need some extra hands," Tom had said that morning, extending a work-gloved hand. "Figured it was time to stop competing and start cooperating." The new house would be 2,400 square feet instead of 3,200. Plenty of room for our family, but not so much that cleaning became a burden for Sarah. The workshop would be separate from the house this time, built with better fire suppression and safety systems. Most importantly, every room was designed not just for function, but for the life we wanted to live. A kitchen that encouraged family conversations, a living room that welcomed guests, bedrooms that felt like sanctuaries rather than showplaces. "You know what I love about these plans," Sarah had said when I'd first showed them to her. "They look like home." As the concrete flowed into the forms that would become our new foundation, I found myself thinking about foundations in general. The old house had been built on solid rock, engineered to withstand Montana's harsh weather and shifting seasons. But it had burned anyway, because no amount of careful construction can protect against every possible disaster. This new foundation was different. Yes, it was built on rock, properly reinforced and waterproofed, but it was also built on something deeper, the knowledge that a house is not a home, that security doesn't come from possessions, and that the most important things in life, love, faith, family, can't be destroyed by fire or flood or financial ruin. "Looking good, Mike." Pastor Williams appeared beside me, watching the concrete truck empty its load into our forms. "How does it feel to be starting fresh?" "Scary," I admitted. But good scary, if that makes sense," he smiled. "The best kind of fear is the kind that comes from stepping into something bigger than yourself." That afternoon, after the concrete truck had left, and the volunteers had gone home with Sarah's thanks and promises of future dinner invitations, I found myself alone on the property for the first time since the night of my breakdown. But this solitude felt different, peaceful rather than desperate, contemplative rather than despairing. I walked to the oak tree where we'd gathered to watch our old life burn 6 months earlier. Someone had cleaned up the debris around it, and new grass was already sprouting through the ash-enriched soil. Life emerging from destruction, hope growing in the very place where everything had seemed lost. Emma found me there an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the thermos Sarah kept in the truck. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked, settling beside me on the ground. "Thinking about foundations," I said. "About what they're really for. To keep the house from falling down. That's what I used to think, but I'm not so sure anymore." I sipped the coffee, grateful for the warmth and for my daughter's presence. "I think foundations are about having something solid to build on when everything else falls apart." Emma was quiet for a moment, studying the freshly poured concrete that would soon support our new life. "Is that why you kept us, even when everything else burned?" The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? That night, when the house was burning, you could have tried to save things. Photo albums, important papers, tools. But you saved us first. Before you even knew how bad it was going to be, you made sure Mom and Jake and I were safe. I'd never thought about it that way. But she was right. In the chaos and terror of that September night, my instincts had been clear. Save the family first, worry about possessions later. Even in my pride and self-sufficiency, some deeper wisdom had known what truly mattered. Because you're my foundation, I said simply. You and Jake and your mother, everything else I built was just decoration. Emma smiled and leaned against my shoulder. I'm glad we're building again. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. That evening, we celebrated the foundation pour with dinner at the hotel restaurant, our last meal in the room that had been home for 6 months. Tomorrow, we'd move into a rental house while construction continued, but tonight we marked the beginning of our return. Jake raised his glass of root beer in a toast to new foundations. Emma followed, to fresh starts. Sarah smiled across the table at me. Or to second chances. I looked around at my family, my real foundation, the solid ground on which everything else could be built, and felt that familiar surge of gratitude that had become my daily prayer. To learning what can't burn, I said, and we drank to the kind of security that exists not in the things we own, but in the love we share, the faith we hold, and the hope that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone. 6 months later, we moved into the new house. It was smaller than what we'd lost, but somehow felt bigger, filled with the laughter of friends who'd helped build it and the memories we were already creating inside its walls. The workshop was finished too, equipped with new tools and old wisdom about what truly matters in the work of building a life. On our first night in the new house, I stood in the workshop and ran my hands over the smooth surface of a workbench I'd built from reclaimed barnwood. The tools hanging on the wall were different from the ones that had burned, but they felt right in my hands, familiar with possibility rather than heavy with pride. I was still Mike Thompson, still a builder, still a provider for my family. But I was those things differently now, with the knowledge that my worth didn't depend on my work. My identity didn't rest in my possessions. And my security came, not from what I could build, but from the one who had found me in the ashes and reminded me who I really was. Outside, Sarah was planting flowers in the garden she'd planned for our new front yard. Emma was in her room, working on the art portfolio she was rebuilding for college applications. Jake was in the living room, playing guitar and singing softly to himself. The sound of their voices drifted through the workshop walls, and I smiled, recognizing it for what it was, the sound of home. Not the house I'd built with my hands, but the life we'd built together with love, patience, and grace. I picked up a piece of cherry wood I'd been saving for a special project and began to plane it smooth, thinking about the jewelry box I wanted to make for Emma's 19th birthday. This one would be different from the one that had burned, simpler perhaps, but carved with new understanding of what makes a gift precious. As I worked, feeling the familiar rhythm of wood against steel, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for foundations that can't burn, for second chances, and for the kind of fire that destroys only to make room for something better. The workshop filled with the scent of cherry shavings and the sound of purposeful work, and I knew I was home. Dear listeners, we hope Michael Thompson's story touched your heart. If you'd like to keep experiencing powerful stories like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Every day we share stories that reveal the depth of life and the human heart. We'll be waiting for you in the comments.